This Sara Gilson situation where she exposed her estranged husband and then got murdered is so crazy, disturbing, and really exposed another problem that keeps getting ignored. Also, why you have more and more people saying this mass shooting in Seattle could have been avoided if people just listened to a TikToker, and why the Pentagon claiming that 4 US troops killed by Iran this month aren't casualties of Trump's war is sending us down a rabbit hole. We're talking about all of that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, starting with this. How many times have you heard this story? A woman ditches an abusive partner, she then gets a restraining order against him, the cops fail to protect her, and she ends up getting murdered. But the situation that you have in your hands this time, it might be even crazier because at the center of it, you have Sara Gilson. She was a 43-year-old hairstylist and TikToker with a very devoted following.
Okay, if you've been seeing this Pavoy ring all over TikTok like I have, just buy it. Click the link below and buy it. I just think this is so cute.
But as it turns out, behind this joyful public persona was this private life haunted by her estranged second husband, Sean Duffy. Because you see, this unstable relationship, it goes back to at least as far as 2021 when Gilson filed 2 protective orders against Duffy. But those were eventually dismissed because, for whatever reason, she didn't show up to a court hearing. You actually had Gilson's first husband, Lyle Landers, who says that they split up amicably and had been co-parenting their 2 kids as friends, explaining the situation to People magazine, saying she had been stuck in a relationship where domestic abuse seemed okay. I had begged her for 5 years to get away from it. I had offered to help her in any way I could to get away from it, but he seemed to have some sort of control over her and she couldn't seem to get away. But apparently something changed last month because Gilson filed again for an emergency protective order against Duffy. And you had her claiming in her application that he had a gun, he threatened suicide, and went on the run. And for some extra context there, earlier that same day, another protective order had been filed by a different woman, the mother of a 15-year-old girl on the youth basketball team that Duffy coached. Right, and according to police, you had another team coach catching him kissing and touching the girl and then told the mother about it. Right, at which point you had this girl spilling everything, saying that Duffy had sent her messages, invited her to his hotel room during a tournament trip, and offered her money to keep her quiet. And then police added over the weekend that similar conduct by this coach towards this particular juvenile player was reported to have occurred over an extended period of time in multiple law enforcement jurisdictions across multiple states prior to this incident. And so seemingly you just had this other reason for Gilson to be like, okay, you're done for good, I'm getting a protective order and making sure that it sticks. And this time it worked. You had Duffy being barred from coming within 100 yards of her, and the order got extended through late August. And so you then had her posting a TikTok video captioned, "I wish I was joking," where you see her entering frame looking nervous and sitting down trembling with her hands clasped. And as dramatic music plays, you have this text overlay reading, "Preparing for when Netflix drops a documentary about my soon-to-be ex-husband, who I just found out is a pedophile." Right, and that video is also part of this TikTok trend where you have people sitting down as if they're being interviewed for a Netflix documentary and revealing something either comically trivial or just very deeply personal. But then what happened next was just horrifying and heartbreaking. Because last Thursday night, just 12 days after, 911 dispatchers got a call from Gilson's home in Oklahoma. Right, and reportedly it was her kid who called, and they could hear a woman screaming and crying in the background, followed by a loud bang. When police got to the home, they found both Gilson and Duffy dead, right, with it appearing that he shot her and then did the same to himself. And so what you've had is just now family, friends, fans, customers, community, everyone's just shocked and heartbroken.
I'm lost for words. Rest in peace, Sara and Duff. May God have no mercy on you.
But then also what you're seeing is that you've got people taking a second look at the whole Netflix doc parody video and going, wait a minute, if this guy was so clearly dangerous that his wife could plausibly joke about being terrified on camera, then maybe someone else should have seen this coming, like the police. Right? Because it appears that there were just so many red flags. He had a gun, he was mentally unstable, his whereabouts were unknown, and Gilson had told the cops all of this weeks before. And well, yes, she had that protective order that's largely only good for deterring him before the fact and punishing him after the fact. Right? When he's breaking into your home, he's pointing a gun at you, that order is nothing more than a piece of paper. So in the wake of all this, one of the things that you've seen just a lot of people online arguing that domestic violence needs to be taken more seriously. Arguing that the courts and law enforcement, they're not doing enough to actually protect women. And then also in this particular case, things get a little more complicated because Duffy was actually a member of the Osage tribe, and the basketball abuse incident happened on tribal land. And so you have local cops saying that they lack jurisdiction, which is why they referred it to the U.S. Attorney's Office instead. So that was separate from the dispute between Duffy and Gilson. And so you have critics arguing they still could have done more for her, whether that's tracking down Duffy or parking a squad car outside of her home. Right? But then also because the internet, or at least pockets of the internet, are a cesspool, if you go, let's say, to Twitter, you'll then also find a lot of disgusting reactions to this story. You've got folks blaming her for provoking him with a TikTok video saying stuff like, well, what do you expect when you destroy his life with an accusation like that? Then also you have people pushing back, arguing, hey, publicly exposing your abuser doesn't justify or even explain your abuser then coming to your home and murdering you. And then you also have a lot of people criticizing the media for using language like she accused him of being a pedophile, which arguably makes it sound like the claim came from her, not the child and the witnesses whom she was merely echoing. But for now, with all this, I'm very curious to know, what your thoughts and reactions to all of this and even the reactions to it are. And then secondly, in the description, there's a link to the GoFundMe for Gilson's kids. It's collected some $30,000 so far, and it reads, donations will help provide for their immediate needs, counseling, education, funeral expenses, and other costs that arise as they begin this unimaginable journey. Right, and then also, speaking of predicted or preventable tragedies, we got to talk about this mass shooting at a Seattle food festival, where you had it leaving 3 dead and several more injured, including a toddler, and you have a lot of people saying that it could have all been avoided if someone had listened to this one content creator. Right, because we're talking about the annual Bite of Seattle festival, which is 3 days of hundreds of food and retail vendors and performers with hundreds of thousands of people that come to visit. It's an event that's been held since the 80s. It's usually a great time, but at around 6 last night, as this year's festival was winding down, gunshots rang out. And according to police, it was 2 suspects shooting at each other, and several people, they got caught in the crossfire. 3 died, 2 at the scene, another at a hospital, and another 4 were injured, including a 2-year-old little boy. Though again, as of right now, those 4 are reportedly in stable condition. But once those gunshots first went off, you had people freaking out and running for the bottlenecked exits. And you had many taking shelter in the Space Needle and the nearby Seattle Children's Museum. And that included one local who had just gotten some crepes with a friend nearby, and they said, we were right next to him when it started, so we took off running. You also had many of the vendors ditching their food carts in order to find cover, and they were reportedly left milling about for hours after, waiting to get their tents and cooking gear back. But the police, they weren't ready to let the scene go quite yet, especially considering that one of the shooters is still on the run. Because while you had one who surrendered on the scene yesterday, though more specifically he was tackled by bystanders and got arrested, the other gunman, they got away and police are trying to track him down. But at least as of right now, they haven't released any sort of public description of it. And there's even talk of more suspects, with Assistant Seattle Police Chief Tyrone Davis saying that they're still trying to figure this out, but there's not any ongoing threat to the public. And then of course with this, we've had a number of public officials giving statements about the senseless and horrific violence, especially considering that this shooting happened just a day after another shooting in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, which injured 3. But then also, while you have some people saying, yes, this was an act of senseless violence, you have them also saying it was completely preventable. And that includes a local content creator who actually made a video the day before the shooting highlighting the incredibly lax security at Bite of Seattle.
No security, no pat down, no search of the bag. Surprise, there's not any security walking around. It's Bite of Seattle got the budget. Y'all got the sponsors. You got the support.
Now, to be clear, this guy said in that same video that he did see security eating in a fenced off area. And Davis said that dozens of officers were at the event working as security. That really hasn't settled things for a lot of people. And it's even sparked a wider debate about what security at big high density events should look like. And so you've got people saying things like, I understand that this festival has been going on for years and years and this has never been protocol. However, in today's society, you have to change with the evolution of the world. The culture and climate of the world means higher security, more armed forces, undercover officers, clear bag policy at events such as this. Does it suck? This is where we are in society? Yes, but it's worth a life saved. And you've even got the creator of that original video calling out the organizers in an interview with Newsweek, saying that he's never going back to Bite of Seattle, even if they do ramp up security and dadding. There should have been a statement out within hours apologizing or just letting people know to stay safe, stay covered. There have not been any statements and dadding. So due to that, I just feel like there's not really a lot of love for the people. My intentions when I made that video was out of a sense of safety and support for the people. For now, we're gonna have to keep our eyes on this. 1, to see if there's more information, and 2, also to see what comes from this manhunt for the second shooter. And then there's even more that we got to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, packing for a trip, it always starts with good intentions, and then somehow it ends with you debating whether 3 pairs of sneakers is reasonable. And that's why today's sponsor, Vessi, has become one of those easy travel picks for me. If I can get away with bringing 1 pair of shoes instead of 3, that's a win. And Vessi's weekend sneaker, it's built for exactly that. Right, they're comfortable enough to spend all day walking in, clean enough to wear almost anywhere, and versatile enough that you don't have to overthink what you're wearing. Right, and then of course, they're also waterproof. So whether it's a surprise summer storm, wet sidewalks, or that puddle that looked way shallower than it actually was, you're covered. And a huge thing is that the waterproofing is actually built directly into Vessi's knit technology, so you don't have to get that stiff, bulky feeling that a lot of other waterproof shoes have. And instead, you get these lightweight, flexible, and breathable shoes. Something that really matters when it's 90 degrees outside and your feet would, probably not want to live in a sauna. And they're also ridiculously easy to pack, so they don't have to take over half your suitcase before you even packed your clothes. Basically, they're the kind of sneaker that keeps up when your plans change halfway through the day. Plus, Vessi backs them with a 1-year warranty and 30-day hassle-free returns. So do yourself a favor, go to vessi.com/PDS or scan that QR code to get 15% off your first pair. But then diving right back into the news, we need to talk about how the Pentagon is now claiming that the 4 US troops killed by Iran this month and the hundreds more who have been injured are not casualties of the war that Donald Trump started with the country back in February. Right, and that's while US strikes are on pause, partly over concerns about our dwindling weapon stockpiles, Iran's rebuilding quickly and refusing to back down, all while Ukraine, they're now getting involved in the fight more directly. But starting with our troops, as we've talked about, 4 service members were killed recently in Jordan and Iraq. It brought the total number killed since the war began to 18. You even had it first reflected in the Pentagon webpage documenting military casualties for Operation Epic Fury, which is of course the name the Defense Department gave the war with Iran. But then, all of a sudden, you had that number going back down to 14. And apparently this change was made because those 4 service members were killed after the ceasefire was reached between Iran and the United States in April, even though, of course, that ceasefire collapsed and the fightings resumed. And so what you saw after the backlash is that the Pentagon's acting press secretary blamed the change on anomalies and temporary data disruptions that he suggested would be fixed quickly. But the website, as I'm recording, still says that only 14 service members have been killed as part of Operation Epic Fury, right along with 417 wounded in action. And then the deaths of those 4 service members are now reflected on a separate webpage labeled simply as Overseas Operations Casualties, with no mention of the war with Iran. And notably, the number of injured listed here is 207, which is 142 more than were reported by the Pentagon last week, which is when you had Chief Spokesperson Sean Parnell insisting that the number of troops injured since July 7th was fewer than 100, even as there were reports that the department opted not to disclose a number of strikes that injured dozens of troops in the region. And now, even if all the casualties have been accurately documented publicly, this new practice of splitting the count across separate web pages, it means knowing that the total number, 18 killed and at least 624 injured, requires adding numbers from separate web pages. And so that's why, for many, this just looks like an attempt to make the truth harder to find. And among those, you had former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta telling The Guardian, there's a deliberate effort here to basically withhold information from the American people, and I think it represents in many ways a shameful approach to sharing the responsibility that we all have when it comes to fighting a war. Now with all this, you have the Pentagon saying that the vast majority of those who have been hurt have quickly returned to duty, but then you also have the head of a nonprofit working on behalf of US veterans noting that the impacts of an injury might not be felt or seen until months or years later, and adding, we deserve to know exactly what's happened. My assumption is that it's about controlling the political narrative before a major national election. Now that said, there is at least technically one other reason why the Pentagon's choosing to report casualties in this way, which is that the War Powers Act requires the president to end military operations within 60 days unless authorized by Congress. And you had Trump telling lawmakers that the escalation that began on July 7th is part of a new conflict with Iran and not just the continuation of the one he started with Israel in February. Of course, there, you have a lot of people saying that's just horseshit. Where you've got critics like Thomas Massie describing the approach as an absurd ruse while adding, the Pentagon is pretending there have been 2 Iran wars separated by a brief ceasefire. The reality, by going more than 90 days without congressional authorization, Pete Hegseth is breaking the law and must be held accountable. And really, whatever they're saying to Congress, it appears very clear that Trump understands this is the same war too. You even had him writing on social media last week that the Iran military conflict had left 18 dead after 4 months. So we then tried to compare that to other longer lasting conflicts with higher death tolls, which is a move that many see as him kind of minimizing the human cost of this war that he started. And that's as he's also been accused of disrespecting fallen troops by claiming that those who had been killed had spoken of wanting to stop Iran from having a nuclear bomb, though it's not clear that that's true. Right, and on that note, as we've talked about before, there is an argument that this war, it is more likely to achieve the opposite of that objective, which is to say to make it more likely that Iran will pursue a nuclear weapon. And in fact, reports now indicate that American intelligence agencies have come to that conclusion, or at the very least, they think that Iran's new supreme leader is far more interested in pursuing a nuclear weapon than his father, the previous supreme leader, who American officials believed wanted Iran to be capable of building a nuclear weapon, but didn't actually want to make one. And last week, you had Trump maybe giving Iran even more reason to pursue nuclear capabilities while also making them even less likely to believe that a deal between them can ever be trusted. And that's because you had him not only signing a deal with Saudi Arabia to help them develop a civilian nuclear program, but also without many of the same safeguards similar agreements have had in the past. He also, less than 24 hours later, threatened not to honor the deal if the country did not recognize Israel, which had not been included in the text of the agreement. And now with that, even though it's been 3 days since Trump paused new strikes on the country, Iran, they've apparently kept up drone attacks in the region. And you have Iranian officials today saying that they're not engaged in any direct talks with the US, right? Only talks with Oman aimed at establishing mechanisms regarding maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. So you had Trump responding by saying that he's ready to go back to strong military action if needed, but that also doesn't change the reasons that advisors urged him to call off further attacks in the first place, or which reportedly included concerns that stockpiles of key air defense interceptors and other munitions could be running dangerously low. Though Trump, he's denied that the dwindling supplies thing is a problem in any way, telling the Wall Street Journal that, quote, we have far more munitions than anyone in the world and far more than we need. But then also, you had the White House arguing that news organizations threaten national security when they report on updated government figures showing how depleted these reserves have become. And so it appears clear that this is a very real concern. And that's as, on the flip side, Iran, they're continuing to fare way better than many expected. And with that, you had the Journal speaking to Israeli and Western officials and looking at satellite imagery to find that Iran has quickly rebuilt infrastructure damaged during the war. Things including missile bases buried inside mountains to bridges, ports, and production facilities. And this faster than expected progress, it may help explain how Iran's been able to keep up the fight. Though, I will of course add that Iran has been getting help, including from Russia. And that it may end up being something that Ukraine is trying to capitalize on. Because you had Zelensky writing on social media on Saturday that Ukraine achieved very strong results with long-range strikes in the Caspian Sea, including vessels used in military cargo shipments involving Iran, as well as a warship. And Iran's foreign ministry responded by saying the strike hit an Iranian commercial vessel, killing one sailor and injuring another, with the foreign minister calling the attack a blatant UN charter violation done at Israel's behest to drag Europe into its war, and saying it cannot go unanswered. But pissing off Iran, it might be worth it for Ukraine, because this could be a very big opportunity to get on better terms with Trump. Something that really appears to be on display in some ways, not only from the way that Trump has been talking about Ukraine, but also what has seemed to be a complete 180 by a lot of Trump commentators. And that includes Laura Loomer, of all people, going to Ukraine and actually interviewing Zelensky and apologizing to their media. But then also, as we're waiting to see how this plays out, and we're left wondering, are we gonna have a World War III by 2028? You then also have a lot of people wondering who will be president after 2028. And that's for a number of reasons, including that just in the last day or so, Trump's posted over half a dozen AI slop posts on Truth Social promoting a 2028 run. Right? And that also comes as part of a much broader shitposting rampage that's just kind of been over the top even for him. Or with your president demonstrating that he's definitely mentally sound by sharing dozens of absolutely unhinged AI-generated images threatening Iran, targeting his perceived enemies, and seemingly comparing himself to George Washington. Right? And then in addition to all the online stuff, you had him on Friday delivering this rambling, deeply cringe speech during the Correspondents' Dinner where his jokes, we'll call them, I guess. They got very few laughs, which seemingly then caused him to go off script, and he became increasingly rattled. So then at one point, in between spewing insults and taking jabs at journalists, he said,
I'm pleased to announce my intention to, and this is somewhat of a scoop, my intention to run for a fourth term as President of the United States. I will be doing that. I will be having an official, in fact, I think I have, I won 3 times. Now I'm gonna do it again. Thank you. I'm gonna do it. Should be easy. I'm getting very good at running for president. No, I won 3 times, did very well the second time, by the way. It's a rigged election, but we don't have to talk about it.
And while you had many mainstream outlets describing this remark as a joke, you also have a number of experts who are increasingly arguing that Trump should be taken seriously here, especially given the fact that he has repeatedly floated this idea. Now, of course, the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution explicitly prohibits anyone from being elected to the office of the president more than twice, and that can't be changed without a constitutional amendment. And you have legal scholars who have said that possible loopholes to that would still be illegal, like having Trump run as Vance's vice president and then taking over as president after they assume office. But despite that, Trump has repeated the idea time and time again. And it's important to note that others who have been close to him have said that he's not joking. You've got people like Steve Bannon who told reporters that he was actively working on ways to keep Trump in office. And he added, when Donald Trump says, I'm serious about this, take him for his word. Also, that's something that's been echoed by Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a close former ally of Trump. And hell, last year, Trump himself literally told NBC News that he was not joking about a third term. He even flagged the whole Vance scheme as a possibility while also vaguely claiming that there are other methods too. And while you later had him walking that back a bit, admitting last October that it seems pretty clear that he can't run for a third term, he has still continued to push the idea while also selling Trump 2028 merch. And in fact, experts say that the back and forth, it still serves the exact purpose that Trump wants, with, for example, the New York Times editorial board explaining he has a history, after all, of using seemingly outlandish speculation to push ideas he genuinely favors, such as overturning an election result, into mainstream discourse. And adding, even when he backs away from a provocation, he often succeeds in raising doubts about those limits. And then going on to argue that Trump's behavior is consistent with a president who indeed wants to serve a third term, if not more, and who keeps raising the idea in the hope of getting Americans comfortable with it. And that's exactly the Trump playbook. You look at both terms, the methods he's used to time and time again normalize ideas that were originally fringe. Though also you have some arguing that as he continues to pull this shit, he ends up just kind of hurting the future of the Republican Party. Because you also have experts arguing that his rhetoric, it effectively freezes the Republican field and demands absolute loyalty to dear leader because no one wants to announce a 2028 presidential run if Trump is potentially running as well, even if it's just a thing that exists in his head right now. And then actually the last thing I'll add to this story, it's connected to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Well, you had many commending people like Wolf Blitzer for announcing the Wall Street Journal reporters who are award winners for uncovering Trump's Epstein connections while Trump was directly there.
The Journal's courageous reporting on President Trump's past relationship with financier Jeffrey Epstein triggered the release of the so-called Epstein files, thousands of documents that might otherwise have remained hidden from the public. And despite the president's threat of a lawsuit, the Journal published a story about a provocative letter to Epstein bearing President Trump's signature. Trump quickly filed a $20 billion lawsuit against the Journal, revealing reporter Khadija Safdar's home address. Her family had to be relocated. The Journal was kicked off of Air Force One, but the reporters continue to file revelatory stories.
You then also had people disgusted by and denouncing Kristen Welker of NBC News because she was reported seemingly being buddy-buddy and joking up with Stephen Miller. And there, you had a lot of people saying that's just another example of why they don't trust mainstream media. And you had others saying it shows the elite class solidarity that's behind the scenes, whereas publicly they try to make everything left versus right. But then from that, I've got your final block of the day today, and we're gonna cram in some more news you need to know. Starting with the news that one of the guys with Nolan Wells the day he died has been speaking out after receiving death threats so bad that he had to miss his funeral. Where you had Warren Hudson telling his side of the story to conservative YouTuber Brandon Tatum. And while people have been kind of side-eyeing pretty much everybody on the boat with him that day, Hudson stuck out to many because his mom or his stepmom, depending on what report you read, is a judge in the area. And so you've had her going on this defense saying no one in our family is trying in any way to impede with the investigation. But now Hudson, he's been able to address a lot of the questions in the case for himself, how Wells got left behind in the first place, what exactly was going on with the boat that day. And this weekend, we also finally got to hear him talk about what happened with his phone, because people had questions about his parents having to track it down that night. And reports said that when they finally got it, some messages had been deleted. But Hudson claimed that he and some other friends, they only had the phone because Wells had left it on the boat that day so it wouldn't get wet. And when friends of Wells' family came looking for it, he said they had no problem handing it over.
The mom that was with them demanded Nolan's phone.
Was there a struggle over it, or did you guys hand it over?
I mean, just handed it over. I mean, we didn't think anything of it. My buddy went out to his truck and handed the phone over. No complications, no issue, nothing.
You also had him denying the rumors about him snooping through or deleting any messages on the phone.
Did you guys go through the phone, or?
Of course not. I mean, well, none of us had a reason to go through Nolan's phone. I don't even know Nolan's password. None of my friends do. We had no reason ever to get on Nolan's phone and look at anything.
Did you delete anything out of Nolan's phone?
No. Of course not.
And with that, you've had people reminding others that this is just one side of the story, so to take everything in with kind of a grain of salt. But also so far, while we haven't heard any concrete evidence about any foul play, that hasn't stopped the suspicion online. And the chaos from all this has apparently gotten very serious for Hudson and his family.
Obviously, I want to say my last goodbyes to one of my best friends, but I mean, if I'm getting thousands of death threats with people saying they're going to kill me and do crazy things to my family and I couldn't bring myself to go.
Right, and the fallout from this case, it's actually been huge from all angles. Right, because you also had reports that Wells' mom, who's a nurse, was getting 1-star reviews at work as the racial tensions got worse. And with that, you had people online saying, all she did was ask what happened to her child. Fighting for justice opens doors to lies, more discrimination, and this very type of evil. And you had others saying this is a whole other level of racism and evil. It's shit like this that makes me lose faith in the world. Though it does look like those reviews have been taken down and people have been flooding her with support since then. And with that, it looks like this interview series that Tatum started is still unfolding, so we're hearing more as time goes on. Right, but it'll be interesting to see how all this impacts opinions online as we wait to hear more from the official investigation. You then also had the wild news that hackers just turned the wildly popular Meccha Cameleon game into a Trojan delivery system, and they did it with the help of Valve's popular Steam Workshop. And the hack appears to have bypassed 2-factor authentication and essentially all security features in place by hiding in some custom maps for this popular game. Right, and if you haven't seen, it makes sense why this game was targeted. It's taken the internet by storm as a fun multiplayer game where one group tries to camouflage themselves into the environment and the other tries to find them. It's like hide and seek on crack. But then you had users noticing that while downloading custom workshop maps, specifically maps like laser tag neon, a tiny command prompt window was popping up for a split second, or which is like the biggest red flag moment on a PC. And turns out, despite clearing Steam's automated review, those map files contained a malicious Trojan dropper designed to run hidden code directly on your machine. And while malware, that's bad enough, it actually gets worse. Shortly after, the game's official Discord server with nearly 100,000 members, it went completely dark. And it turns out, one of the system engineers was actively working to patch the original exploit, only for then their own backup PC to get infected. With the hackers then appearing to bypass the 2FA, booting all the server admins, and taking over the Discord, which ends up just being a goldmine for scammers. So currently, it's unknown exactly how many people were infected by the hack, but I will say there is good news. The developer pushed out an update to patch the vulnerability and neutralize the bad maps. And their Discord, it's back up and running, and the malicious counts have reportedly been removed. But it ends up being another terrifying reminder that even on the biggest platforms, places like the Steam Workshop, they are not 100% immune, and everyone just assumed they were. But then finally today, let's end on some entertainment news, because we now know who the next Black Panther is. Right, because at the San Diego Comic-Con this weekend, you had Ryan Coogler announcing that David Jonsson is going to be playing T'Challa's son in the third Black Panther. And of course, those are huge shoes to fill after Chadwick Boseman's passing a few years ago. And since then, people have been pretty vocal about who they've wanted to see behind the suit. And actually, one of the biggest names that we've heard over the years is Damson Idris. And you might know him from Snowfall or F1, and if you don't, definitely learn. But he was rumored to be a top contender for the role. You had fans online saying he was the perfect choice, with some saying they don't even want to see another Black Panther if it's not him. And now you got people sounding off again, saying they wanted Idris because he's a superhero franchise type actor, whatever that means, and adding that Jonsson, he's a, quote, guy whose movies are always up for Oscars type actor. And then outside of that pushback, you also have people people questioning how this is going to impact their box office numbers. Because Coogler's movies can pull crazy numbers. The first Black Panther had the 5th biggest opening weekend in North American history. And actually the last one, Wakanda Forever, it was the largest November opening weekend in North American history as well. But also with these critiques, I gotta know, like, Jonsson's not some newbie. He's had hits with movies like The Long Walk and Alien Romulus in recent years. And for me personally, this is my opinion, I left The Long Walk going, I want to see this motherfucker in as many movies as possible. And well, obviously we can never know, what would it look like if a different actor had insert whatever movie. I am personally excited to see what he does in this. But that, my friend, is the end of your Monday show. But I also dove into this Nintendo tariff refund scandal that's just divided the internet that you should definitely check out in another video. So you can click or tap, or I got a link in the description. But whatever you do, thank you for watching. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.